I'm Grace, 32, and my brother just signed away everything he thought he'd inherited while I sat quietly in the corner, like the family wallflower everyone expected me to be. He actually raised a champagne glass and toasted our dead father. Thank you, Dad, for finally recognizing who really deserves the empire. The clink of crystal against his wedding ring still echoes in my ears. When the lawyer cleared his throat and asked to read the second part of the testament, the champagne flute slipped right out of Derek's manicured fingers. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely underestimated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how we got to this delicious moment of poetic justice. 3 weeks earlier, I was arranging white lilies in Dad's hospital room when Derek burst through the door like he owned the place, which apparently he thought he did. Grace, you can't keep monopolizing Dad's time, he announced, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. The board members need to discuss transition plans. I looked up from the vase I was arranging. Dad always loved fresh flowers, said they reminded him of Mom's garden. He's your father, Derek, not a quarterly earnings report. Don't be naive. Derek rolled his eyes. Someone has to think practically about the company's future. Dad was barely conscious on pain medication, but Derek was already measuring the office drapes. Classy, right? I'd been there every single day for 6 months, watching Dad fade away from pancreatic cancer, holding his hand through chemo sessions, reading him financial reports when he was too weak to focus on the pages himself. Derek. He showed up twice a week with his wife Melissa, spent 20 minutes making small talk about golf scores, then disappeared to handle urgent business matters. Urgent business matters that apparently included meeting with estate lawyers without telling me. The nurses say you've been sleeping here again, Derek continued, settling into the visitor's chair like he was conducting a board meeting. That's not healthy, Grace. You need to maintain perspective. Perspective. That was Derek's favorite word when he wanted to dismiss anything that required actual emotion or effort. When Mom died 8 years ago, Derek told me I needed perspective about grief. When I graduated summa cum laude with my MBA, he said it was good, but I should keep things in perspective since I'd never run a real business. Dad likes having family around, I said simply, tucking a wayward lily into place. Family, Derek repeated with that patronizing smile he'd perfected in prep school. Grace, you do realize that once Dad passes, you'll need to find your own path, right? The company requires serious leadership. There it was. The assumption that had colored our entire relationship since childhood. Derek was the heir apparent, the chosen one, the son who would carry on Dad's legacy. I was the daughter who could arrange nice flowers and maybe handle some administrative tasks if I was lucky. Dad's eyes fluttered open during Derek's little speech. Even weak and medicated, his gaze was sharp when it landed on his son. Still planning my funeral, Derek? Dad's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 40 years building an empire from nothing. Derek's cheeks flushed. Dad, I'm just being practical about succession planning. Practical, Dad repeated, his eyes shifting to me. Grace, honey, could you get me some water? As I held the straw to his lips, I caught Derek checking his Rolex. He had a tennis game with potential investors in an hour, because networking was more important than being present for his dying father's final weeks. I've been thinking about legacy, Dad said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been in days. About what really matters. Derek perked up, probably calculating his future net worth. Grace, Dad continued, you remember when you were 12 and found those errors in the quarterly reports? The ones the accounting firm missed? I nodded. Dad used to bring work home sometimes, and I'd gotten curious about the numbers that didn't add up. Turned out, a junior accountant had been skimming small amounts from multiple accounts. My attention to detail had saved the company thousands. She's always been detail-oriented, Derek said dismissively. But detail work isn't the same as strategic leadership. Dad's hand found mine on the bed rail. His grip was surprisingly firm. No, it's not the same. It's better. Derek's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to Dad contradicting his assumptions about family hierarchy. The company needs vision, Derek pressed. Innovation, bold decision-making. The company needs someone who understands its soul, Dad replied quietly. Someone who knows that numbers tell stories about people's lives. Someone who remembers that behind every profit margin are families depending on the jobs we provide. I saw Derek's expression shift from confident to concerned. This wasn't going according to his script. Dad, you're tired, Derek said, standing abruptly. We should let you rest. Grace, don't keep him up too late with your flower arranging. After Derek left, Dad was quiet for a long time. Finally, he squeezed my hand. Gracie, I need you to promise me something. anything, Dad. Promise me you won't let anyone convince you that you're not capable of anything you set your mind to." I thought he was just being encouraging, the way dying parents try to build up their children's confidence. I had no idea he was preparing me for the biggest surprise of my life. The funeral was everything Derek had orchestrated down to the last detail. Black marble, white roses, and a reception that felt more like a corporate networking event than a goodbye to our father. Derek played the role of grieving son perfectly, accepting condolences while subtly reminding everyone that he'd be taking over the company. "Richard would be so proud," Mrs. Patterson from the country club whispered to me. "Derek has his father's business instincts." I smiled and nodded, because that's what good daughters do at funerals. We don't point out that Dad's business instincts included actually caring about his employees, not just their productivity metrics. "Grace is devastated, of course," I heard Derek telling a group of board members near the memorial display. "She was always Daddy's little girl. This transition will be especially hard on her." Daddy's little girl. At 32, with an MBA and 6 years of quietly handling Dad's personal business affairs, I was still being reduced to a sentimental child who couldn't handle adult responsibilities. Derek's wife, Melissa, materialized beside me, her expression perfectly calibrated for public sympathy. "How are you holding up?" "Grace, this must be so overwhelming." "I'm managing," I replied evenly. "Derek's been worried about you," she continued, lowering her voice to confidential. "All this stress, and now having to think about your future. Have you given any thought to what you might do next?" What I might do next. As if Dad's death had suddenly rendered me unemployed from a hobby, not bereaved from losing the most important person in my life. "I'm sure something will work out," I said, because explaining that I'd been handling Dad's estate planning for 3 years would require more emotional energy than I had available. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, approached our small group with the solemn expression of someone about to discuss money at a funeral. "Derek, Grace, when you're ready, we should schedule the reading of the will. Perhaps early next week?" "Of course," Derek said, his hand automatically moving to straighten his tie. "I assume it's fairly straightforward?" Mr. Henderson's pause was almost imperceptible. "We'll discuss everything in detail at the appropriate time." I caught something in his tone that Derek missed, a carefulness that suggested the will might not be quite as straightforward as my brother assumed. "I'll have my assistant coordinate with your office," Derek continued. "I imagine Grace will want to be there for the family provisions, even though the business matters won't really concern her." Again, that assumption, that the business Dad had built from nothing, the company I'd watched him nurture through late nights and difficult decisions, was somehow outside my sphere of interest or capability. "Actually," Mr. Henderson said carefully, "I believe Grace will find the business provisions quite relevant to her circumstances." Derek's smile faltered slightly. "Relevant how?" "We'll cover everything comprehensively next week," the lawyer replied diplomatically, then moved away to pay his respects to other mourners. That night, alone in Dad's house for the first time since his death, I sat in his study surrounded by 40 years of business records, family photos, and personal mementos. The room smelled like his cologne and the leather-bound books he'd collected but never had time to read. Derek had offered to help me clean out Dad's personal effects, which I knew translated to making sure nothing valuable got overlooked or improperly distributed. I'd politely declined his assistance. On Dad's desk, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in his distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before his death. "My dearest Grace," it began. "If you're reading this, then the conversation I've been dreading has become unavoidable. By now, Derek has probably made it clear what he expects his inheritance to include. I need you to understand that what people expect and what actually happens are sometimes very different things." My hands trembled as I continued reading. "You've spent your entire adult life believing that success means being quiet, accommodating, and grateful for whatever scraps of recognition come your way. You've watched Derek assume authority that was never rightfully his, and you've accepted it because you thought that was your role in this family." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing memories I'd forgotten, times when Dad had specifically asked for my input on major business decisions, moments when Derek's supposed business acumen had actually created problems that I'd quietly helped solve. "I've made many mistakes as a father," Dad continued. "The biggest was allowing Derek to believe that inheritance is about genetics rather than capability. Tomorrow, you'll discover that I've spent considerable time ensuring the company's future is placed in the hands of the person most qualified to protect it." The final paragraph made my chest tight with emotion and anticipation in equal measure. "Grace, you have never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary. You've just been waiting for someone to notice that you already are. Consider this my formal notice. The world is about to discover what I've known all along. that you're not just capable of running this company, you're the only person who truly understands what it means to honor the legacy we've built together. I read the letter 3 times before the full implications settled in. Dad hadn't just included me in his will as an afterthought or family obligation. He'd been planning something much bigger, something that would change everything Derek thought he knew about his future. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize your entire life is about to transform? When everything you thought was impossible suddenly becomes inevitable? The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I had 3 days to prepare for what promised to be the most interesting family meeting in our history. Tuesday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that Dad always said was perfect for making important decisions. The law office smelled like mahogany and old money, the kind of environment where fortunes are decided and family dynamics are permanently altered. Derek arrived 15 minutes early, naturally. He'd brought Melissa for moral support and wore his most expensive suit, the one he'd bought for closing the Peterson acquisition. He was treating this like just another business meeting where he'd walk away with what he wanted. I arrived precisely on time, carrying only my purse and Dad's letter, which I'd read so many times I could recite it from memory. Derek barely acknowledged me beyond a perfunctory morning grace, as he reviewed what looked like prepared statements on legal letterhead. I had my attorney review the standard inheritance protocols, he explained to Mr. Henderson as we settled into the conference room. Just want to ensure we handle everything efficiently. Mr. Henderson nodded politely. I appreciate your preparation, Derek, though I should mention that your father's will contains some unique provisions that may require additional discussion. Unique how? Melissa asked, her voice sharpening slightly. We'll address everything systematically, the lawyer replied, opening a thick folder. Shall we begin? Derek straightened his tie and reached for his gold pen, the one he used for signing important contracts. He was ready to claim his inheritance with the same confidence he'd shown since childhood when dividing birthday cake or choosing the best Halloween candy from our shared hall. Mr. Henderson began with the standard legal language, the whereases and heretofores that make lawyers sound important and everyone else feel excluded. Then he reached the substantive provisions. To my son, Derek, he read, I leave the following: my watch collection, my golf clubs, my membership to the Riverside Country Club, and the amount of $50,000. Derek nodded approvingly. Those were clearly the personal items. The real inheritance would come next. Additionally, Mr. Henderson continued, Derek will inherit the family cabin in Vermont, along with all furnishings and recreational equipment therein. Derek smiled. He'd always loved that cabin, but I could see him waiting for the main event. The company, the investments, the real wealth that would secure his future as Dad's business successor. To my daughter Grace, Mr. Henderson read next, I leave my grandmother's jewelry collection, all family photographs and personal mementos, and the amount of $50,000. So far, everything was exactly what Derek had expected. Personal items for both children, equal monetary gifts, with the real estate and business assets presumably coming next. Derek reached for his pen again. Now, Mr. Henderson said, his tone shifting slightly, we come to the business assets and primary estate provisions. Derek leaned forward, ready to accept his destiny as head of Morrison Industries. I leave Morrison Industries in its entirety, including all subsidiaries, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and business assets to my daughter Grace Morrison, who has demonstrated the vision, integrity, and capability necessary to honor the legacy I've built. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming in the building's ventilation system. Derek's pen remained frozen halfway to the signature line of whatever document he'd been prepared to sign. I'm sorry, Derek said finally, his voice carefully controlled. Could you repeat that last part? Mr. Henderson looked up from the will with professional composure. Morrison Industries and all associated assets are left to Grace. Derek's face went through several color changes. Pale white, then flushed red, then a sickly green that matched his tie. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Mr. Henderson replied gently. Your father was very specific about this provision. However, there is a conditional clause that requires additional explanation. Conditional clause. Now things were about to get really interesting. Grace inherits full ownership and control of Morrison Industries, the lawyer continued, with one stipulation. Derek will retain his current position as regional sales director, reporting directly to Grace as CEO, for a minimum period of 2 years. His salary and benefits will remain unchanged, provided he fulfills his employment obligations professionally and without interference in company operations. The room was so quiet you could have heard a stock ticker tape drop. Derek's prepared inheritance document sat forgotten on the table as he processed what had just happened. He hadn't just failed to inherit the company, he'd been demoted to being his little sister's employee. "This is ridiculous," Melissa whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Richard was obviously not in his right mind when he wrote this. "Mrs. Morrison," Mr. Henderson said firmly, "I can assure you that your father-in-law was completely lucid when he finalized this will. In fact, he specifically anticipated questions about his mental capacity and included additional documentation to verify his competency." Derek finally found his voice. "What additional documentation?" Mr. Henderson pulled out another folder. "Psychological evaluations from 2 independent specialists, both conducted within the last 6 months, medical assessments confirming his mental acuity, and recorded video testimony explaining his reasoning for these inheritance decisions." Video testimony. Dad had literally created evidence to prevent Derek from challenging the will. Even from beyond the grave, he'd outmaneuvered his son's assumptions about who deserved control. "I want to see that video," Derek demanded. "Certainly. Though I should warn you, your father was quite explicit about his concerns regarding your business judgment and leadership capabilities." Derek's jaw clenched. He was learning in real time that confidence isn't the same thing as competence, and that assumptions about inheritance based on birth order don't always align with parental assessment of actual qualifications. I sat there absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened, trying to process the fact that I'd just inherited a multi-million-dollar company that I'd been told my entire life was beyond my capabilities. What do you think Derek's next move will be? Drop your predictions in the comments below, because this family drama is just getting started. The video testimony was everything I'd expected and more. Dad, looking frail but sharp-minded, sitting in his hospital bed just 3 weeks before his death, explaining his decision with the methodical precision that had built Morrison Industries from a small manufacturing company into a regional powerhouse. Derek has spent his entire career assuming that authority comes from entitlement rather than achievement, Dad said directly into the camera. He's never originated a successful business strategy, never solved a complex operational problem, and never demonstrated the patience necessary for long-term growth. His sales numbers are adequate because I assigned him our most established client relationships. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair as his father's recorded voice continued dismantling his professional reputation with surgical precision. Grace, on the other hand, has been quietly handling complex business challenges for years. She restructured our vendor payment systems, identified cost savings that improved our profit margins by 8%, and has been managing my personal business affairs with exceptional competence. I'd forgotten about some of those projects. Tasks Derek had dismissed as administrative busy work when Dad mentioned them at family dinners. Apparently, Dad had been paying closer attention to my contributions than I'd realized. "The decision to make Derek report to Grace as an employee is not punitive," Dad continued. "It's educational. Perhaps working under genuinely effective leadership will teach him the humility and work ethic he's never developed." The lawyer paused the video. Derek's face had progressed from red to purple, and Melissa looked like she wanted to throw something expensive at the wall. "This is character assassination," Derek sputtered. Dad was obviously bitter about his illness, taking out his frustrations on family members who were trying to support him. "Support him how?" I asked quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since the inheritance reading began, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "By showing up twice a week to discuss your golf game? By scheduling business meetings while he was receiving chemotherapy?" "I was handling critical company operations," Derek shot back. "Someone had to maintain client relationships while you were playing nursemaid." Playing nursemaid. There it was again. Derek's automatic dismissal of anything that required emotional intelligence or genuine care as somehow less important than his version of business leadership. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should review the practical implications of these inheritance provisions. Grace, as the new owner and CEO, you'll need to make several immediate decisions about company operations." I pulled out a leather folder I'd brought with me. While Derek had been preparing standard inheritance paperwork, I'd been reviewing 6 months of company financial records that Dad had given me access to during his illness. "Actually," I said, opening the folder, "I've already identified several operational improvements that should be implemented immediately." Derek's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Grace, you can't just waltz into a CEO position and start making changes. Running a company requires experience with strategic planning, risk management, personnel decisions." "You mean like the strategic planning that led to the Henderson account disaster last quarter?" I interrupted, pulling out a specific report. "When you promised delivery timelines we couldn't meet and cost us a $2 million client relationship?" Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound emerging. He'd clearly forgotten that I'd been copied on all the incident reports Dad received about that particular fiasco. Or the risk management expertise you demonstrated when you authorized the Colorado expansion without proper market research? The expansion that lost us $400,000 before Dad quietly shut it down? Melissa reached over and placed a restraining hand on Derek's arm as he started to stand up. She could see this confrontation wasn't going in their favor. As for personnel decisions, I continued, I assume you're referring to your recommendation to fire Janet Morris from accounting because she questioned your expense reports? The same Janet who discovered the billing errors that saved us $60,000 in overpayments to vendors? Mr. Henderson watched this exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a chess match where one player had just discovered they'd been playing checkers the entire time. Grace, Derek said through gritted teeth, you're cherry-picking isolated incidents to make yourself look competent. I smiled. There's something deeply satisfying about responding to years of condescension with actual facts and documentation. Derek, I'm not trying to make myself look competent. I'm demonstrating that I am competent. There's a difference. I pulled out another set of documents. For instance, did you know that the client retention analysis I completed for Dad last year identified 12 at-risk accounts? And that the intervention strategies I recommended helped retain 11 of them, preserving approximately $1.8 million in annual revenue? Derek had gone very quiet. So had Melissa. Or that the operational efficiency study I conducted identified redundancies in our manufacturing process that could reduce production costs by 12% without affecting quality or delivery schedules? Mr. Henderson leaned forward with interest. You've been conducting operational analyses for Morrison Industries? For the past 3 years, I confirmed. Dad asked me to review different aspects of the business and provide recommendations. I assumed it was just to help me understand the company better. Apparently, it was actually a job interview. The longest job interview in corporate history, and I'd apparently passed with flying colors. Derek finally found his voice again. Even if you've done some analysis work, that's not the same as running an entire company. You have no experience with leadership, with managing employees, with the day-to-day pressures of executive decision-making. You're right, I agreed. I don't have experience running a company, but I do have experience working with Dad to understand every aspect of this business, from ground-level operations to strategic planning. I know our employees' names, their strengths, their concerns about company direction. When's the last time you spent time on the manufacturing floor talking to people who actually make our products? Derek's silence was answer enough. I also know, I continued, that our best sales rep, Patricia Chen, has been considering an offer from our biggest competitor, and that our head of manufacturing, Tom Rodriguez, has been frustrated with communication gaps between sales and production that have led to unrealistic customer promises. I'd learned both of those things during my daily visits to Dad's office, when employees felt comfortable sharing their concerns with someone who actually listened to them. These are exactly the kinds of operational challenges that require immediate attention from leadership, I said. And fortunately, I've been preparing solutions to present to the new CEO. I paused for effect, smiling at Derek's increasingly uncomfortable expression. That would be me, by the way. Have you ever felt completely underestimated and then had the perfect opportunity to prove everyone wrong? Because what happens next is going to be absolutely satisfying. The first Monday morning of my new life as CEO arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that makes everything feel possible. I'd spent the weekend reviewing personnel files, financial projections, and operational reports, preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging conversation of my professional life. Derek had requested a private meeting before the company-wide announcement, probably hoping to negotiate some kind of face-saving arrangement that would preserve his dignity. I'd agreed to meet him in Dad's office, my office now, though the transition still felt surreal. He arrived at 8 sharp carrying a leather briefcase and wearing what I'd learned to recognize as his serious business expression, the same look he'd worn when trying to convince Dad to acquire that failing textile company in North Carolina. Grace? He began, settling into the chair across from Dad's massive oak desk. I've been thinking about this situation over the weekend. I'm sure you have, I replied, arranging the morning's priority reports in neat stacks. One thing Dad had taught me: preparation and organization communicate competence before you even speak. Look, I know you think you're ready for this, but running a company is more complicated than you realize. Derek's tone was patronizing in that carefully modulated way he'd perfected over the years. The stress, the responsibility, the constant decision-making, it's not like the project work you've been doing. I looked up from my paperwork. Derek, what exactly do you think I've been doing for the past 3 years? Administrative tasks, analysis, support work? He waved his hand dismissively. Important work, certainly, but not the same as strategic leadership. Strategic leadership, I repeated. Like your strategy to expand into the Colorado market without researching local regulations? Or your strategic decision to promise the Henderson account delivery schedules that our production team couldn't meet. Derek's jaw tightened. You can't run a company by dwelling on past mistakes. You're absolutely right, I agreed, which is why we need to focus on preventing future ones. Speaking of which, I've scheduled a meeting with Patricia Chen for this afternoon to discuss her concerns about the Parker Industries offer. Derek's eyes widened slightly. How did you know about that? Because I pay attention to our employees instead of treating them like background noise. I pulled out Patricia's file. She's been our top sales performer for 3 years running, and she's considering leaving because she feels undervalued and excluded from strategic discussions. Patricia's fine, Derek said quickly. She's just negotiating for a better commission structure. Actually, she's negotiating with Parker Industries for a senior sales manager position that would double her salary and give her equity participation. I opened the file to show Derek the competitive offer I'd discovered. An offer that our current compensation structure can't match, unless we make some creative adjustments to her role and responsibilities. Derek stared at the document. Where did you get this? Patricia brought it to me Friday afternoon. Apparently, she trusts me enough to discuss her career concerns honestly instead of just walking away without notice. The truth was, Patricia had come to me because she'd watched me support Dad through his illness and had seen how I interacted with employees at company events. Unlike Derek, who treated staff like furniture that occasionally required maintenance, I'd spent years learning people's names, asking about their families, and actually listening to their professional concerns. What did you tell her? Derek asked. That I'd review her situation and get back to her by Wednesday with a comprehensive response. I closed Patricia's file. Which leads to our first official executive decision, Derek. Our decision? Your decision? Actually, as regional sales director reporting to me, I need you to recommend how we should restructure our sales team compensation to retain top performers while maintaining profitability margins. Derek looked like I'd just asked him to solve calculus problems in ancient Greek. That's not really my area of expertise. Sales compensation isn't your area of expertise? I raised an eyebrow. Derek, you've been in sales for 8 years. If you don't understand how commission structures work, what exactly has been your contribution to this company? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Derek was just realizing he'd started himself. I handle client relationships, he said finally. Strategic partnerships. High-level negotiations. Excellent. Then you'll be able to explain to me why our client retention rate has dropped 6% over the past 2 years, while our customer satisfaction scores have declined in 4 out of 5 service categories. I pulled out another report. This one marked with red tabs indicating declining performance metrics. Dad had been tracking these trends for months, growing increasingly concerned about the direction of Derek's sales division. Those numbers are affected by market conditions, Derek protested. Industry-wide trends, economic factors beyond our control. Interesting theory. Except our main competitor, Parker Industries, has increased their market share by 12% during the same time period. I turned the report so Derek could see the comparative analysis. Same market, same economic factors, better results. Derek's confident expression was evaporating like morning fog in sunlight. For the first time in our professional relationship, he was being held accountable for actual performance data rather than being evaluated on charm and family connections. Grace, you're micromanaging details that don't reflect the bigger picture. Derek, I'm examining details that create the bigger picture. I stood up and walked around the desk to sit in the chair beside him, the way Dad used to do when he wanted to have serious conversations. Let me ask you something honest. When was the last time you generated a new client relationship? Not inherited one from Dad's network, not maintained an existing account, but actually identified and secured a new business partnership? Derek was quiet for a long moment. Client development is a complex process. It takes time to build relationships. It's been 3 years, I interrupted gently. 3 years since you brought in a new client that generated meaningful revenue for this company. The statement settled between us like a medical diagnosis that neither of us wanted to hear, but both of us needed to acknowledge. What are you saying, Grace? I'm saying that effective immediately, your role is going to change. You'll continue as regional sales director, but with specific performance metrics and accountability measures. Patricia Chen will be promoted to senior sales manager with expanded responsibilities for new client development. And you'll be working directly with me on a professional development plan to improve your actual sales capabilities. Derek's face went through several color changes. You're demoting me. I'm defining your job responsibilities clearly for the first time in your career. I smiled. Think of it as professional education. The kind Dad apparently hoped you'd develop naturally, but realized needed more structured encouragement. Derek stood up abruptly, his briefcase clutched tightly in his white-knuckled grip. This is humiliating. Derek, this is accountability. There's a difference. As he reached the door, I called after him. Oh, and Derek? The company-wide announcement about the ownership transition is scheduled for 10 o'clock this morning. I'll need you there to demonstrate your support for the new leadership structure. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. And if I refuse? Then you'll be proving that your employment here is incompatible with company success? I replied evenly, which would make terminating your position much easier to justify. Derek left without another word, probably to call Melissa and explain how his little sister had just outmaneuvered him in the first round of their new professional relationship. I sat there in Dad's chair, surrounded by the challenges and opportunities of running Morrison Industries, feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. Everything I'd been told was impossible was now simply my Tuesday morning to-do list. What do you think happens when the rest of the company learns about their new CEO? Because Derek's reaction was just the warm-up act. The company-wide announcement was scheduled in our main conference room, which could hold about 50 people when packed efficiently. I'd asked our office manager, Sandra, to send out the meeting notice Friday afternoon with minimal details. Just important company update from new leadership. By 9:45 a.m., the room was buzzing with speculation and nervous energy. Employees filled every chair and lined the walls, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Morrison Industries had never held an all-hands meeting on short notice unless something significant was happening. Derek arrived exactly at 10 o'clock, taking a seat in the back row like a student hoping to avoid being called on by the teacher. His expression was carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in his shoulders and the way he gripped his coffee cup. I walked to the front of the room carrying Dad's worn leather portfolio, the same one he'd used for important meetings throughout my childhood. Inside were the notes I'd prepared over the weekend, though I'd memorized most of what I wanted to say. Good morning, everyone. My voice carried clearly through the room, stronger and more confident than I'd expected. I know you're wondering about the reason for this meeting, so I'll get straight to the point. I paused, looking around the room at faces I'd been seeing for years during my visits to Dad's office. Patricia Chen sat in the front row, her expression attentive but guarded. Tom Rodriguez from manufacturing nodded encouragingly from the middle section. Sandra, who'd been Dad's administrative assistant for 15 years, smiled with what looked like anticipation. As you know, my father's death last week marked the end of an era for Morrison Industries. What you might not know is that he spent considerable time preparing for this transition, including making some decisions that might surprise you. I opened the portfolio and pulled out a copy of the inheritance documents, holding them where everyone could see. Effective immediately, I am the new owner and CEO of Morrison Industries. The silence that followed was profound. I watched employees process this information with expressions that ranged from shock to confusion to what looked suspiciously like relief. I know this is unexpected, I continued. Many of you probably assumed Derek would inherit the company, given traditional expectations about family succession. I caught Derek shifting uncomfortably in his back row seat. However, my father made this decision based on his assessment of who was best qualified to preserve the company's values while ensuring its continued growth and success. Patricia raised her hand tentatively. Grace, no offense, but do you have experience running a company? That's an excellent question, Patricia. And the honest answer is no. I don't have experience as a CEO, but I do have 3 years of experience analyzing every aspect of this company's operations, working directly with Dad to understand our challenges and opportunities. I walked closer to the front row, adopting the conversational tone Dad had always used when addressing employees. More importantly, I have a clear vision for our future that builds on the foundation Dad established. I know each of your names, your roles, your contributions to our success. I understand that our company's strength comes from our people, not just our profit margins. Tom Rodriguez spoke up from the middle section. What about Derek? What's his role going to be? I glanced toward the back row, where Derek was studying his coffee cup with intense concentration. Derek will continue as Regional Sales Director, reporting to me as CEO. His experience with our established client relationships will be valuable as we work to strengthen our market position. It was diplomatic language for what everyone in the room probably understood. Derek had been demoted from heir apparent to middle management employee. I want to be transparent with all of you about my priorities, I continued, pulling out another document. First, we're going to address compensation and advancement opportunities that reflect your actual contributions. Patricia, I'd like to discuss your promotion to Senior Sales Manager after this meeting. Patricia's face lit up with surprise and gratitude. Around the room, I saw other employees exchanging glances that suggested this was the kind of recognition they'd been hoping for, but not receiving. Second, we're implementing new communication protocols that ensure your concerns and suggestions reach leadership instead of getting lost in bureaucratic layers. Tom, I want to hear your recommendations for improving coordination between sales and production. Tom nodded enthusiastically. These were conversations he'd been trying to have for months with limited success. Third, we're establishing professional development programs that help employees advance their careers while strengthening their value to the company. Training, education support, mentorship opportunities, investments in people that pay dividends in loyalty and performance. I could see Derek in my peripheral vision, his expression growing more uncomfortable as I outlined initiatives that highlighted everything his leadership approach had lacked. Finally, I said, we're going to modernize our operational systems to improve efficiency and reduce the kind of administrative bottlenecks that create frustration for employees and clients alike. Sandra practically beamed at this announcement. She'd been requesting system upgrades for 2 years without success. I know change can be unsettling, I continued, especially when it happens quickly. But I want you to understand that these changes are designed to strengthen this company, not disrupt it. Dad built Morrison Industries on principles of integrity.